One of the major sociologists that we look at is Emile Durkheim. He is a founder of one of the most influential perspectives in sociology, a perspective that you need to have a good level of understanding about in order to be able to do well in your GCSE, and that is functionalism. Now, we'll come on to functionalism in a bit more detail, but today we're going to be briefly looking at Durkheim, who he was, and what he said about a number of things. As usual, this lesson has a number of key words it needs to be aware of. Sociology, which we discussed previously, is the study of society and social behaviour. Obviously, that's what you're studying, so it's helpful to know and have a definition of that word. Society, which is the thing that sociologists study, and essentially that is just people living together, the institutions and structures that impact people. So when we talk about society, it's just the groups and institutions that are formed. And then anime is a key item or idea, within functionalism. That's something that we'll come on to later. But anime is essentially the breakdown and blurring of societal norms which regulate an individual's behaviour. And this can lead to a feeling of sort of listlessness or not fitting in or not feeling like one belongs. So the three key words for today are sociology, society, and anime. Moving on from the key words, here we have a key quote from Emile Durkheim. Now, he is quoted to have said, "Crime is normal, and it's an integral, which means essential, part of all healthy societies." So I asked you in class to discuss what Durkheim means here when he says that crime is normal and it's essential for a smooth society running. And we're going to go on to have a look at why Durkheim says this, but it's very important that we understand that as a functionalist, Durkheim generally views most things as having a positive function in society. Pretty much, functionalists view every single thing, every institution within society as performing a function, and this includes crime. Functionalists are very, very focused on the idea of value consensus and the idea that people have shared norms and values, and we'll see today how crime is, from a functionalist view anyway, an important part of reinforcing those shared norms and values that everyone in society holds. Functionalists believe that crime is inevitable and universal, which means it's always going to happen and it's going to happen everywhere. And Durkheim argues that crime will always happen, it's inevitable, for two main reasons. He argues that given that individuals are exposed to different influences, they're going to have different norms, values and expectations, and also the idea that there are a diversity of lifestyles and values and different subcultures, and each of these groups have their own norms and values which may differ or be deviant, but differ from the mainstream norms and values. So it's the way people are raised and the subcultures and groups in which people form. For example, for some people, it's perfectly acceptable to punch someone in the face because they called your mom fat. Now, this obviously isn't a thing that the government thinks is acceptable, because that would just be an assault. So that would be an example where someone's norms and values clash with society's norms and values and cause crime. Another example could be drug use. For some people, drug use has been normalised through their subculture or through their socialisation, whereas the government does not accept that. So by consuming drugs or taking drugs, you would be deviant and you would be breaking social norms, and also, in this instance, committing a criminal act as well. So Durkheim says that crime is inevitable, it will always happen, it's universal, it will happen everywhere. Alongside describing crime as inevitable and universal, Durkheim, as a functionalist, sees there as being some positive functions for crime. So Durkheim views the idea of crime existing in society as positive. It's important to note that as a macro theory, which we'll explain later if we haven't already, a macro theory looks at society as a whole rather than individuals. So when Durkheim says that crime is positive, he doesn't mean it's a good thing that someone's, been mugged or shot, but what he's saying is that the existence of crime within a society can have positive effects. And two of the positive effects that Durkheim outlines are boundary maintenance and adaptation and change. Boundary maintenance is the idea that crime performs the positive function of reinforcing and reaffirming society's shared values on what is right and wrong. So what he means by this is that crime produces a reaction from society and unites its members in condemnation of the criminal or the criminal act. This can cause social cohesion. You can see, for example, 9/11 would be an excellent example of this, where people pull together as a result of seeing a shocking crime. A more recent thing could be Lucy Letby, who is the child serial killer who killed 7 babies, I think. But our reaction to that reinforces society's norms and values and our commitment to them. Another way that Durkheim describes crime as performing a positive function is adaptation and change. And he would say that all change in society starts with an act of deviance. In order for people to change anything, there must be some scope for people to push against societal norms. And these acts of deviance or crime allow society to change and progress. You could use, for example, the Stonewall riots, which were an example of same-sex relationships being classed as deviant by the police, and thus the Stonewall Club in New York being raided by the police, which turned into a riot, and Stonewall was the start of the LGBTQ+ movement as we know it today, the start of the Pride movement. Obviously norms and values have changed as a result of that, but these deviant acts, acts that go against social norms, happening helps to push adaptation and change, helps us to change things. This could be seen, for example, in same-sex marriage now being legal in the UK. So, boundary maintenance, reinforcing social norms and values, and adaptation and change, helping to change society and push society forward, or help society to progress through these deviant acts happening. Other functionalists speak about the safety valve or the warning device. So Davis describes deviance as a safety valve, which means it releases the stresses in society, for example, prostitution, allowing men to release their sexual frustrations, or domestic violence, performing a similar function. Obviously, remember, we're not talking about these being good for the individual, but we're talking about them being good for society. So men using prostitutes, for example, helps men to relieve their sexual frustrations without threatening the monogamy of the nuclear family, and thus without threatening the existence of the nuclear family as the societal norm. Cohen also describes crime as a warning device. He says that if crime exists in society, it tells you that something may be wrong with that society, so it acts as a warning device. For example, a high incidence of truancy in a school might suggest that there's a problem with the education system, or an increase in racially or religiously motivated assaults or attacks might tell you that there's something systemically wrong going on that the government needs to address. So, functionalists talk about boundary maintenance, adaptation and change, the safety valve, and the warning device as 4 positive functions for crime and deviance in the UK. Another question we need to think about is whether or not society actually promotes crime and deviance. So Durkheim argues that too little crime in a society is a warning signal. If there's not enough crime going on, or too little crime, it might suggest that the government are repressing or controlling its members too much, stifling individual freedom and preventing any change or positive progress from happening. And Erickson in 1966 argued that since deviance performs positive functions, there are some elements of society who promote deviance to maintain a healthy balance of crime. He would suggest that agents of social control, such as the police, actually aim to maintain certain levels of crime rather than to get rid of it completely. And if you're being very cynical, you could make the argument that the police don't want to remove all crime, because if they remove all crime, they remove themselves from being needed. They sort of get them to put themselves out of a job. So, functionalists view crime as generally positive for society. It's one of the institutions, it's one of the things that positively affects society. Remember that functionalists view all of society as like a human body, with all of the organs working together, and if you remove one of them, the body's going to become ill. Functionalists view society in the same way. All of the aspects of society work together to create social cohesion and to make society run smoothly. So hopefully that's given you a brief understanding about functionalism. We focused mainly on crime there, but the ideas behind Durkheim and what he was talking about and the ideas of functionalism have been briefly outlined. Next lesson, or next video, we'll have a look in a bit more depth at functionalism before we move on to our other perspectives. If you've got any questions, as always, pop them in the comment section, or if I am your teacher, come and find me in the math classroom.